lecture 9, and we're starting.
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Let me get everybody in the room here first before we start.
How are you doing today, Professor?
Kevin, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
And can you see me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Well, as you may notice, I told you I was going to be in the mountains, and I did that lecture last Thursday from the mountains in New Mexico, and I planned on being back in Lubbock today, but I got 10 inches of snow yesterday and I couldn't get out of my driveway. So I am still here. It's a nice problem to have, I guess. My plan is to get back to Lubbock tonight, maybe. And anyway, I'll be here. I'll be somewhere Thursday when we continue our third lecture on World War II. Now, it's possible because there's so much material here. There's so much material that I don't want to rush through it. And your examination is a week from Thursday, and it's going to be on 5 lectures. It's going to be on 3 on World War II, 1 on more modern times, and one on the Depression. So to the extent that I don't quite finish on Thursday, I'll use the first part of next Tuesday to finish that lecture. It'll still be the same amount of lectures, 5. And then your TAs and perhaps myself will then will then help you with a review of those 5 lectures like we did the last time. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. So when I finished this, when I stopped talking on last Thursday, I left the issue of Pearl Harbor out because Pearl Harbor is very important, obviously. So I want to set that up today. I'm going to show you a picture, the most famous picture, you might argue, of Pearl Harbor, and that is the sinking of the USS Arizona battleship on December 7th, 1941. Now remember, the United States is not in this war yet. We are participating to the extent that we are sort of buying our way out with what we call the Lend-Lease program. Now, somebody asked me the question about that the other day, and I said, well, there's actually another name for it. So I kind of did a little research to see what that, what the actual HR number was, the House resolution number. And quite amazingly, the answer to that question is that they named the resolution that required us to give ships and to repair ships to England. The resolution number was 1776. Now you can sort of see that there were people getting kind of cute with this, that we felt like we were going to help our former enemy when we created America way back in 1776 by naming the resolution to help them in their war against Germany. We would name it 1776. But for your purposes, you just have to think of it as being the Lend-Lease program. We were trying to buy our way out. So let's think about this. Franklin Roosevelt runs for president for the third time. Remember, he's elected in 32, he's reelected in 36, and then in 1940, and there was no term limits back in those days. In 1940, Franklin Roosevelt runs for re-election and says, I will not send American boys to fight a war in Europe. Yeah, he said that, sort of like Wilson, what Wilson said in World War I. But this is 1940, so he's elected in November of 40, and then he will take office in March of 1941, which is about the same time that this Lend-Lease program is signed. Now, the Prime Minister of England is this man by the name of Winston Churchill. I'll put his picture up when I get to the next lecture. Winston Churchill is trying so hard to get the United States into this war. And of course, there is an axis now. There is an alliance between Germany and Japan. Okay, Germany and Japan. But Japan is not in the war in Europe, obviously. So the United States is still watching this war. We are not involved in this war. Okay? December 7th, 1941. Why do we believe this happened? Well, historians have dealt with this for many, many years. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was the U.S. Navy's headquarters. It had been headquartered in San Diego, California. But the idea was we need to move. We need to move this, the bulk of our Navy, including our aircraft carriers, we need to move them closer to Asia. And the distance between California, San Diego, and Asia is a long ways. But if we could move them to Pearl Harbor, the idea is maybe the Japan, who are getting very adventurous in the Pacific, as we talked last week, they're getting very adventurous in the Pacific. So the idea would be, let's move the bulk of our Navy to Pearl Harbor. Now, Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. Hawaii is not a state of the United States at that time. It is a territory, but it is not a state. But Pearl Harbor, and I know many of you have probably been there, as I have been many times, Pearl Harbor is a very static location. It's a fairly shallow, I would argue, a fairly shallow harbor, but it's deep enough for the major naval vessels, the battleships, the cruisers, the training ships, all of the things that we had in our fleet at that time. It's deep enough for those, but it's not real deep. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. Now, there are controversies about whether or not the United States knew that Japan was going to bomb that location. I can tell you this, that all of the research that I've done, all of the research that most reputable historians have done, will tell you that there was intelligence that said that it could happen, but not that it would happen, and not a specific date. There is no proof to the controversy that says that Franklin Roosevelt wanted Japan to bomb Pearl Harbor so that he could get America in this war. My father is a World War II veteran. He passed away about 7 years ago now. And I used to talk to him all the time about what did you think it was going to take to get the United States into this war? Because my dad always talked, about his experiences in the war. He was stationed in San Diego, where I happened to be born after the war. But my father always would talk about, well, there was no reason for the United States to get involved in the war in Europe. Truth of the matter is, the isolationist attitude of Americans to keep us out of this war was very real as I talked about with all of those wartime treaties that we were signing. But President Roosevelt also wanted to keep us out of this war as best he could. So there's no truth to the theory that he wanted us to get in the war by having us be bombed. However, Japan was concerned about the United States of America because they knew, with the world's most powerful navy as we had, they knew that we would be able to stop them in their efforts in the Pacific, their efforts to find oil in the Dutch East Indies, down in the islands, to keep their military machine alive. So the way to do it was to destroy as much of the United States Navy as it could, all at one time, all at one time. Here's another picture. You see, you can see the fire over the harbor. The attack, I'll give you some statistics on the attack. 4 battleships completely sunk. We only had 8, and 4 of them were sunk, 4 of them badly damaged. So in terms of the biggest of our ships, 3 cruisers, the next level down, were damaged. 3 destroyers were destroyed. But the thing that saved the United States from having its military completely, or its navy completely destroyed, the thing that saved us is that our aircraft carriers and some of their destroyer escort groups were at sea in an operation, and the Japanese missed them. They attacked Pearl Harbor, but they completely missed our carriers, which saved us. Now, here's a newspaper clipping on December 8, 1941. It says 1,500 dead in Hawaii as Congress votes war. This is the next day. I can tell you that the attack took place at 7:58 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning almost. There's about a 7-hour time zone difference between Hawaii and Washington, D.C. So that would have been about 3 o'clock in the afternoon back in D.C. And it shocks everybody. And that 1,500 dead in Hawaii is the next day. That's our body count in one day, but that isn't anywhere near the total number, which turns out to be approximately 2,400 killed in action and about 1,200 wounded in action. Now, I will make an argument that there were very few wounded because the Japanese targeted military installations. They did not target Honolulu, downtown. They did not target civilians. And yes, it was a sneak attack. I always make the case that, well, why would it not be a sneak attack? Why would you not want to be, if you're going to be effective, you want it to be a sneak attack, right? But the U.S. Embassy in Washington and the Japanese did not declare war against the United States until after they had bombed Pearl Harbor. The United States will declare war against Japan the next day by a vote in the Congress of the United States. So this number of 2,400 approximately is a very significant number of American dead sailors, nurses at hospitals. They did bomb hospitals. I'll also mention to you, if all that you know about the bombing of Pearl Harbor or about Pearl Harbor is that you saw a movie called Pearl Harbor, then you don't know very much, because that is a horrible movie. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those things today, but the movie itself is pretty bad. Oh, it's kind of exciting to watch, and some of the combat footage, mostly done by computer, is pretty neat. If any of you have been to Pearl Harbor, if any of you have not had the opportunity to go, I strongly recommend that you do. It's an amazing place. You can go out on the ship, you can look at the memorial, you can still see oil seeping from the Arizona, which is still embedded down below. And one of the really cool things I think that's done, and it just happened to be being done on one of my trips to Pearl Harbor, was that there, at the time I was there a few years ago, there were still, I think, 38 survivors of the Arizona. There's less than that now. But there's a very nice thing that they do where if you die and you are a survivor of the Arizona, you can have your body cremated, or your family can have your body cremated, and they put you in an urn, and National Park Service divers will take your urn down to the Arizona and place it in the ship where all of you, all of your other buddies that died in that terrible day are entombed. And it's a beautiful ceremony to watch them, the divers, take those urns to the down below. So the United States of America, the next day, President Roosevelt says, a day that will live in infamy. America declares war on Japan. So the axis, as we call it, is Japan, Germany, and Italy. The allies are the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, lots of other countries. I think I've got a slide on that here in a minute. So if you will just hold on for 1 minute here, let me bring up lecture number 10, if I can find it. Whoa, Kevin Harris, can you see this one?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. All right, so as I've talked before, when I lecture on World War II, and I do a 16-week course on World War II, plus a graduate course. So there's lots of stuff going on here, and I don't like to follow any great pattern of it because I want you to feel what it must have been like for these leaders that were constantly dealing with a world at war, not a place, but lots of places. So today I'm going to be talking about what we call critical theater decisions. Where do we go first? What do we do first? How do we do this? I'm going to talk about some of the people involved. We're going to get into North Africa. We're going to go into the Pacific, and we're going to come up through Italy. And then I'm going to talk again about the Holocaust, which is such an important part. So let me just see here if I can put a map up. See this map of the world. So we're talking here about this part right here, Europe, all these countries in Europe. And we're talking about Japan way over here. And the way we're going to have to get to Japan, of course, is from here. And there's lots of things going on that have to be decided by the Allies. And the Allies at this time are the United States of America, led by this guy, President Franklin Roosevelt. This guy, President Stalin of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, the Soviet Union. And I think I showed you this picture the other day, President Roosevelt, who would never allow his picture to be taken in a wheelchair. He had polio. But imagine his thinking is, I can't let Hitler and Hirohito know that the leader of the most powerful nation in the world that has now come into this war, I can't allow them to see me in a wheelchair because they will think America is weak. So he made sure that none of these pictures were ever taken of him. This particular picture was taken down at Warm Springs, Georgia, which was sort of his vacation home. And then this guy has just been elected as prime minister as the prime minister. So we've got some decisions to make. Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt are going to have to decide, where do we go first? Well, I guarantee you this guy knows where he wants you to go first. He wants you to invade Europe and come across France and get all the way to Russia because he's getting his butt kicked by the Germans on the border of Poland. So Stalin is arguing for an invasion of Europe. He doesn't care about what's going on in the Pacific. He doesn't care about Japan or any of that stuff. But the United States of America, we've got a society that wants to go to war against Japan because it's Japan that has bombed us into this war. So the argument is we have to make some decisions. So President Roosevelt allows Winston Churchill to pretty much carry the day and to say that if we're going to help the Soviet Union, I think we can do both. I think we can invade Europe sometime and also fight a war in the Pacific. I think we can do both theaters. So I'll be talking about the European theater and I'll be talking about the Pacific theater. So the idea is, first, we have to go into North Africa. We have to control the Mediterranean. So what does that mean? Well, I've got a slide up here that says that the German army has been fighting the British army in Africa, North Africa, for a couple of years now. Why there? Well, the oil that exists in places like Algeria and Tunisia and Libya and all these countries of North Africa, and I'll get to a map of that here in a moment, but all of those places in North Africa have oil that is needed by the German army. And so the German army believes that North Africa is very important for them to hold on to, for them to continue to control all of the things in Europe. Remember, they've invaded Czechoslovakia, they've invaded Poland, they've taken over France. They've been bombing the hell out of England. So the Mediterranean becomes very important. The Germans have been there a long time. The British army has been there a long time. They're fighting, they're very experienced, but Roosevelt decides to send the United States Army into North Africa. We are not well trained. We have no experience fighting in combat, whether that be desert combat or jungle combat, which we will be doing in the Pacific against the Japanese. So let me talk a little bit about who we're dealing with here. Let's see, here's a map. Here's a map of North Africa. So you can see kind of what we're dealing with here. There's a little place here called Kasserine, and I'm going to be talking about that here in a minute in Tunisia. The leader of the German army in North Africa is General Erwin Rommel. Write his name down, General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox. This guy was an experienced combat infantryman from World War I. He was very experienced. His name will come up a lot as we talk about World War II, because ultimately he will suffer, he will commit suicide at the strong suggestion of Adolf Hitler, because Hitler finds out that he was involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Now, we can make an argument, and I don't like to use phrases like this. There's a phrase called the good Nazi. And sometimes people put Erwin Rommel in that good Nazi range. There actually were some good Nazis that were involved in China. You remember I talked about the rape of Nanking. Well, there were some German Nazis there that were so upset with what Japan was doing to China in Nanking, in that rape of Nanking that I talked about last week, that they actually sent wires to Hitler and explained what the Japanese were doing, and Japan couldn't, and the Germans couldn't even believe that that was going on. And some of the good Nazis that were in the German embassy, because remember, they're allied with Japan, in the German embassy couldn't believe what the Japanese were doing. But I'm not going to put the term good Nazi on Erwin Rommel because he did kill a whole lot of Americans. He was probably not quite as anti-Semitic as Hitler, but he was still not any great guy. But he was a damn good strategic infantry armor soldier, no question about it. So Franklin Roosevelt decides to put in charge of the North Africa campaign General Dwight David Eisenhower, known as Ike. And I know you're going to think about this for a minute and you're going to say, gee, isn't that the guy that became president of the United States a few years later? Absolutely, that's the guy. And we'll talk about him when he becomes president. But today I'm talking about him when he's a general. Ike was what a lot of people would refer to as a clerk general. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. He was a very good general, but he was not a combat experienced general. When he was in World War I, he didn't get a lot of combat experience. He was a colonel, and he was a good manager. He will become, obviously, in my next lecture, he will become the commander-in-chief of the supreme Allied commander of all forces. But right now, we're just talking about North Africa. General Eisenhower is put in charge, and he, in one of his first major battles against the Germans, against Rommel, is a place called Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. And I'll spell that for you. Kasserine Pass, K-A-S-S-E-R-I-N-E, Kasserine Pass. General Eisenhower is in charge. The man whose name you don't need to write down, but I'll throw it out there, is a guy by the name of Friedendahl. Friedendahl is in charge of the operation on the ground itself. General Eisenhower is in charge of the whole African campaign, but Friedendahl is in charge of the corps that takes in the battle at Kasserine. And what happens at Kasserine is a complete embarrassment for the United States of America. We get our butts kicked by the Germans, who are very experienced there, very experienced, and we aren't. So General Eisenhower gets rid of Friedendahl, says we don't need you anymore, and he places in charge somebody who had been his boss previously between the wars, his boss, and that man's name is General George Patton. You heard about him when we talked about the Mexican expedition and Pancho Villa and all that stuff when he was just a lieutenant. General Patton was an armor guy, believed strongly in armor operations, was not as involved with the infantry, but was involved in tanks. Our original tank armor guy, George Patton, and a very good general on the ground. We can make a lot of cases for some other problems he has, and I'll talk about that later today and then maybe on Thursday. But General Patton is placed in charge of the North African campaign under Eisenhower. And I will argue that General George Patton saves Eisenhower's ass. Had it not been for the great performance of George Patton and his direction of the men in the North African campaign, we can make an argument that Ike would not have been would not become as famous as he was, maybe would have never become the Supreme Allied Commander, but Patton was pretty much the guy that saves Ike from being looked upon as a bad commander by his on-the-ground actions in the North, in that area. We essentially will win the battles against the Germans in North Africa in what we refer to as Operation Torch. Operation Torch, T-O-R-C-H. That is the whole of the operations in North Africa to control the Mediterranean. Now I'm going to come back to that, but first Let's go to the Pacific. Let's go over to Asia. The United States of America has got a problem, and that is we have been bombed into this war by the Japanese. The American people, yeah, they care a little bit about Africa, but the truth of the matter is we are pissed at what the Japanese have done to kill all those Americans and to essentially destroy the American Navy. So the first thing is revenge. The United States decides, and Franklin Roosevelt as commander asks the question of some of his military staff, is there any way for us to be able to get aircraft all the way to Japan and bomb the Japanese? And everybody just looks at him like, well, what are you, crazy? We don't have aircraft that can carry enough fuel to fly all the way to Japan. We don't control any of the islands along the way. Germany controls most of those, or Japan controls most of those. There's no way to do this. Roosevelt says, we'll come up with something. We got to show the Japanese what we're about. And so a few guys, actually, it wasn't one man, come up with this idea that somehow or other, if we could figure out a way to get bombing aircraft, to be able to take off from an aircraft carrier that we would place still a long ways from Japan, but be able to take off and fly all the way to Japan and drop bombs on Tokyo, the capital. Wow, would that ever be something? Now you can imagine some of the problems with that. First of all, you got to have enough fuel, and where are you going to land when you get done bombing? Well, a guy by the name of Jimmy Doolittle, you can write down his name if you want to, Jimmy Doolittle, D-O-O-L-I-T-T-L-E, is given the responsibility of putting together a group of naval pilots. And remember now, we're talking, Army pilots. We're talking about Army pilots because there is no Navy pilots yet. At this time, the Navy is the Air Force, the air power is still in the Army. We're going to get these Navy bombers, and we're going to, Army bombers, and we're going to take off from an aircraft carrier, and we're going to fly all the way to Japan, drop bombs on Tokyo. Okay, and we're going to then take those aircraft and crash them into China. You talk about a suicide mission, big time suicide mission. 16 aircraft, B-25s, if you're interested in that sort of thing. B-25s will take off from the USS Hornet and will fly. There's 16 of them, like I say, they will fly to Tokyo, and they will, in a period of about 30 seconds, drop bombs on Tokyo. Now, later in the war, we're going to bomb the hell out of Tokyo. And Tokyo has a lot of paper, not really paper, I guess we could say wooden, but heavy paper or wooden buildings. And so when you set one on fire, it burns a lot of things. But this bombing with these aircraft, first of all, the Japanese on radar find out that we're getting close to Japan. And so we have to take off further away. We don't have the right kind of gasoline or the right kind of fuel, enough fuel to be able to get all the way there. So we start throwing machine guns overboard. We throw everything overboard. So we got enough fuel to at least get to Tokyo, but we don't have enough fuel to get to China. And a lot of those aircraft will ditch in the sea. all the aircraft, all 16 aircraft are lost. 11 crew are killed or captured. Some Japanese will capture them. Three of the men captured will be executed by firing squads considered to be war criminals. One will die in captivity, and there will be very few of them live to talk about what happened in what's called the Doolittle Raid. Now, if you saw that movie Pearl Harbor, most of that stuff about the Doolittle Raid is fictional. All the stuff about the love story and the girls and all that stuff's fictional. But it is an interesting thing, because what it provides for the American people is that we've got a way to get to you, but we don't really have a way to be militarily effective because our aircraft are not big enough. We got to start building bigger airplanes. These B-25s and the B-24s, they're not big enough to carry much armament to get all the way there. So we've got to come up with another way of winning this war in the Pacific. So let me see here. We're going to develop a plan. We're going to develop a plan that I want you to write down, and it's called island hopping. Island hopping. The plan is we're going to go to every island that is that has people and that has the ability to build airports. And we're going to build runways. We're going to have Marines protect those runways. And we're going to be able to then invent new aircraft, build bigger planes with bigger armament and with bigger fuel capacities. And then we'll get edged closer and closer and closer to Japan by island hopping. Now, the Japanese have a way of trying to stop this. They're going to try to control every island. They're going to put large military units on each island. And as a result of that, in most cases, United States Marines, sometimes Army, but a lot of Marines are going to have to fight their way onto these islands. Now, the man in charge of the United States Army is a general by the name of Douglas MacArthur. You can write his name down, M-A-C and then A-R-T-H-U-R, Douglas MacArthur. He is stationed in the Philippines. Now, you know about the Philippines, and you know about how the United States fought that war against Spain in order to essentially control the Philippines, because the Philippines gives us access to this great big China market. Now we need not China as a market, we need China as an ally. And we will, the Chinese will become an ally of the United States and Britain and Canada and the allied countries. China will support us, but Japan occupies China. So that's kind of a problem. So in the Philippines, what we see happen in the Philippines is that the Japanese know how important that is, and they attack the Philippines and essentially take over the country. And Franklin Roosevelt, our president, orders General MacArthur to leave the Philippines and to go to Australia. Now you can see on my map here, it's quite a ways from Japan, way down here to Australia. And you'll essentially go by boat. It takes a lot of days to get all the way to Australia. So what we see happen in this theater, in the Pacific theater, is the United States knows they need to get to Japan to control, to eliminate Japan as an enemy, but we also don't have the aircraft to do it yet, and we don't have control of the islands yet. So the plan is to march our way across the Pacific. Now we will get help from Australia, and we will start battles along all of this area down here around Australia and trying to take over all of these islands. I'm going to point out one other thing that's important to know. Right here is a place called the Coral Sea next to Australia. The Battle of the Coral Sea becomes a very important battle. And for sort of ideological or technology reasons. And it's one of the first, it is the first naval battle in the history of naval warfare where no ships will ever destroy by gunfire another ship. Let me repeat that. In no circumstances in the Battle of the Coral Sea will one ship destroy another ship. How, you say, how can that happen? Well, it's because of air power. By now, both the Japanese and the United States have fighter aircraft on our carriers. And those fighter aircraft will fight off of their carriers, but the escorts of their destroyers and everything won't do much because they never get close enough to each other because they don't have to. It's better to have the air power destroying other ships than to have to get so close with your own ship that you put it in danger. So I always like to say that the Battle of Coral Sea becomes a very important battle. And just from that standpoint. So I also want you to think about this being a technology issue. We've got to be able to get Marines on every island and take on the Japanese on every island. And we've got to be able to get bigger aircraft to get there. By the time we actually end this war in 1945, we will have aircraft that are so much bigger and so much more powerful than anything that we have at the beginning of the war. So let me just at least mention on the home front, that means that Ford Motor Company and General Motors and all of these places whose job it is to normally build cars are going to build tanks, and they're going to build guns, and they're going to build artillery cannons, and mostly they're going to build aircraft, big aircraft. Places like Willow Run, Michigan, that normally would build General Motors cars, and Ford Motor Company with Henry Ford are going to be building airplanes, big airplanes. So let's see here. What do I want to do now? Let me go back to Europe, okay? So the goal of the European campaign is we now control North Africa. That means we control the Pacific, the Mediterranean, okay? We got to get to Berlin. That's the goal. We got to get up here where Hitler is. That's the capital of Germany. How are we going to do that? Well, there's lots of different ideas now that we control the Mediterranean. So one of the ideas is let's go up into Europe by coming up, as we call it, through the boot. Here's the football, Sicily, and here's the boot, Italy. So the United States and Britain will launch an attack against the Italian army down here in Sicily. And there are Germans there too. Remember, Italy with its leader, and you can write his name down too. His name is Mussolini, M-U-S-S-O-L-I-N-I, Mussolini. He is allied with Hitler. We think of Hitler and his Nazi party, and we think of Italy with Mussolini being fascists. Now, how active is the Italian military? Well, the Italian military has conquered one country in Africa, and that's a country called Ethiopia. Italy has conquered Ethiopia, but they're kind of I don't want to make the argument that they're not a strong military, although they're not, but I don't want to focus on that. What I want to say is Hitler and Mussolini were both very charismatic leaders. Mussolini does not buy into the same anti-Semitic attitudes of Hitler. He doesn't even like Hitler very much. But the truth of the matter is he allies himself with Germany. So Italy and Germany are together, and their military is in Italy, as are Germans also in Italy. So the idea is we've got to get into Europe. Why don't we do it through the boot? Why don't we conquer Sicily and then conquer the boot itself in terms of Italy? Now, the truth of the matter is the Sicily campaign we will see become a battleground within, and I'm putting battleground now in quotation marks because the Allies, being the United States and Britain, are both going to want to have credit for taking over Sicily. As crazy as that seems, George Patton, our successful commander in the Africa campaign, will take on, not physically, but take on leadership-wise, the leader of Britain's army, and his name is Montgomery, Montgomery. I even hate to mention this, but I have to, because what happens in Sicily is the battle to get to the point over here where you can then come into the boot. See if I can bring that here. This area right here. The ability to get there, Montgomery's group will take it around one corner and Patton's group will take it around another, trying to race to get there. How silly is that militarily? Very, very silly. But the thing that I want to mention to you is an incident that takes place in Sicily where General George Patton is so wrapped up with his troops that he will start visiting hospitals where American soldiers are being operated on, are being they're wounded, their wounds being taken care of, to put Purple Hearts on their chests. And in one of those incidents, he will see an American soldier sitting over in the corner crying. And he will ask what he's crying about. And the soldier essentially says, "Sir, I can't take it anymore. I've been in combat now all these weeks and I just can't take it anymore." We would call that today PTS. And I don't like to use the word PTSD, and you'll find out about that when I talk about Vietnam. But PTS, post-traumatic stress, we would call that. Back then we called it shell-shocked. It's been around since the days of Alexander the Great. It's what happens to soldiers when their nerves just come to an end. You can only take so much. And he was crying. And Patton went crazy and slapped the soldier across the face. Well, word got back to General Eisenhower, and the pictures got back into the press of not the slapping incident, but the story itself, that Patton had slapped an American hero. And Eisenhower took it to mean that he couldn't trust General Patton's patience, his temper, and he had to be careful about assignments that he gives General Patton. That's going to become important when we get to the invasion of at D-Day. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. So let me see, what else have I got here? Okay, the Holocaust, continuing on. The concentration camps. Let me show you a map of the concentration camps throughout Europe. Now, I told you the other day that concentration camps, in the beginning, concentration camps were mostly about labor. If you were someone who could work and build things that were needed by the military, then you had a chance of living. If not, you were going to be worked to death. But the German Nazi Party, Hitler and his men, his secret service, come up with another idea. And the idea is what we call death camps, extermination camps. All of these squares that you see are extermination sites, and all of the triangles are concentration and extermination sites, that's the white triangles, and then the darker triangles are concentration camps. So that's the legend here. So if you see these extermination camps, that means if you are sent there, you're sent there to be killed. Now you don't know that. You're put on trains and taken to those death camps. But Hitler and his Nazi party come up with an idea. And the idea is what is referred to as the final solution. The final solution. A bunch of the leaders under Hitler get together in a place called Wannsee, which is a suburb of Berlin. And at this one-day meeting, there will be a discussion about what is the most effective way to kill Jews. After much discussion and experimentation that had been going on with such things as carbon monoxide, which essentially turns a body pink and is slow, with such ideas as a bullet to the head, which takes ammunition away from soldiers, they come up with this idea to use a gas. The gas is called Zyklon B. And it is a gas that will kill almost instantly. Architects are hired for these extermination camps. And these extermination camps will be designed to burn the bodies after the men, women, and children are gassed. So the idea is that to come up with an efficient way, and they come up with an idea where they believe with Zyklon B placed into shower heads or placed in outside of the shower camps, when Jews are brought to these camps by railroad car, and I'll use the phrase or a name of a place called Auschwitz, Auschwitz, which is in Poland. The idea will be to take Jews there, telling them they're going to a concentration camp to work on railroad cars, unloaded off of those cars, and then told that they need to be deliced and cleaned up, and they will be taken to showers, women and children together, and then men in another shower, where they take off all of their clothes, and then gas is placed into the showers that comes out of the shower heads, and they are executed. And then they are placed in carts, and they are taken to a place to be buried. Before the architects come up with the idea of crematoria, they are placed in these big mass graves. And you can see here these bodies, which is a very, very terrible sight. And it's so terrible that it's going to require me to stop talking about it right now. And I'm going to stop the share. And I will invite you to ask me questions.
What did you say was the name of the plan, the idea that Hitler and the Nazi Party came up with?
The final solution. The final solution.
Hey, Professor.
Yes, Denny.
So my only question was, so do we know what was going on in Germany with how Hitler was treating the Jews and stuff before 1941 or no?
That is an excellent question. And people that lived through that were part of the Roosevelt administration will want to deny that they don't know. They didn't know the extent of it. But we know there were immigrants coming to America during that time that at least, if nothing else, we knew about the Nuremberg laws. We knew the laws had said that these things are going to happen. So I argue, and I think most historians would say, yes, we knew. Now, did we know the extent? Generally speaking, we talk about a number somewhere between 6 million and 7 million Jews being killed, okay? So, and we know that because this is what's really weird. The Germans kept track of everything. The Auschwitz Chronicles have a record of every single Jew that was killed. They put the number tattoo on, and then when that person was executed, they wrote it down. So we know. So I always say, and I hope that there's nobody in here, and you're 270 people. And statistically, I hope this doesn't happen, but generally speaking, in almost every class I've ever taught for the last 15 years, there will be what we call a Holocaust denier. Somebody that will try to make the case that it didn't happen. Man, it happened because we know, because the Germans kept track of it happening. And I've been to so many Holocaust museums. I've been to the one in Prague. I've been into the one in Jerusalem. I've been to the one in Houston, Texas. I've been into the one in Washington, D.C. And I strongly suggest that any of you that haven't been to one, go to one. Because the bottom line is they kept track of everything. We know it happened. We know it happened. But the extent to which America, I can't make the case that America we weren't as, if you want to use degrees, as anti-Semitic, perhaps, as were the German Nazis at that time. But the truth of the matter is it happened. And I think I have some film, or not film, but I think I'm going to show some slides in the next lecture where I will show the liberators that came into those concentration camps like Dachau. And General Eisenhower went to the homes around those camps. And he said, didn't you smell anything? Didn't you sort of, and people would deny that it happened. And so he would take these people, these homes, took them into the camps, showed them the bodies, showed them the crematoria. It's an amazing story. And it's one that I always make the argument as a military historian. I always make the argument, what would have happened if Hitler was, we're not supposed to play what if games, but there's only, you don't tell anybody I'm doing this. But what if Hitler had not been anti-Semitic? And what if he had used Jewish soldiers the way the German army, the Kaiser used German soldiers, Jewish soldiers in World War I? How much more effective would his army have been to maybe at least sue for peace that would have been better than what happened to him? But he fought the war against the Jews equally as the war against the Allies. Railroad cars that should have been taking men, materiel, and weaponry to the front to help his German soldiers were being used to take Jews to their death. How is that a good general? That you're thinking of stuff like that. Sorry, long answer to your very good question, Denny.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else?
Yes, I do.
Denny. Oh, that's Denny again. Who do I have? Clara.
Right here. Who was the one person who was like going up against Montgomery?
Oh, General Montgomery. General Bernard Montgomery was he was the leader of the British military. Okay, he
Okay.
had he essentially had the job with Britain that Eisenhower has. Now, the reason he's important and the reason I throw him out, not just I got his name out here now because he is the leader, and Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, understands that when it comes time to invade Europe, that's what we will call D-Day, and I'll be talking about that next week, Thursday. When we invade Europe, there's got to be someone in charge of all these allies. And Eisenhower is named Supreme Allied Commander. Montgomery believes that he should have had that job because Britain has been in this war for about 3 years longer than the United States. The United States is kind of a reluctant participant because we got pulled into it by Japan. But Britain has been fighting for their very existence, led by Montgomery. Some would make an argument that Montgomery was a better general than Eisenhower. But Winston Churchill knew that an American had to be in charge of this thing. And I'll tell you this, and you can write this down, and you can disagree with me if you want to. But the United States of America is in charge of the winning side in this war as much as anything, not because of our men who fought it, but because of our technology to build tanks, guns, and mostly airplanes. And I would never minimize anyone's grandpa or great grandpa. Many of you have grandpas that fought in this war, and my dad fought in this war. And so I would never tell my dad that. Okay, but as historians, we look at the what happened. 400,000 American men die, so it's huge. But our technology no one else could do what we did. No one else could build those airplanes, build those tanks, and ultimately, as you know, we're going to build a bomb, a great big bomb over here in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And so from the perspective of what our most effective thing was that we did in this war, it was our technology and our ability. Our industrialization makes all the difference in the world. Long answer to a short question again. Anyone else?
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Avery.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you already mentioned this or not, but do we know why Hitler was so anti-Semitic?
Well, I talked about it a little bit on Thursday, that in
Okay,
Mein
sir.
Kampf, in his book that he wrote, he talks about eliminating Jews from the face of the earth. He calls them
Right.
vermin, eliminating the vermin. Now, why did he think that? Historians still try to deal with it. Hitler historians. One theory was that his mom's doctor, his mom died of breast cancer. His mom's doctor was Jewish. But we also have a record that he wrote and thanked that Jewish doctor for trying to save his mom. He was turned down at the Venice School of Art, and some theorists say that some people believe that Hitler tried to become a great artist and he was turned down, and some of the committee were Jews. That's another theory. And then there's one even crazier theory, and that is that Hitler was part Jewish himself. And that when you go way back in time, and that he had something against one of his relatives. But we can also ask this question. Why was he so anti-Semitic? We can also ask the question, why were so many people of that time anti-Semitic? Because they were, and a lot of them, he was able to use the Jews as a scapegoat and claim that because all the banks were run by Jews and they were the ones that were hurting you in your pocketbook. So he used them as a scapegoat. But whether he really hated them or he needed them as a scapegoat, I think we go back to Mein Kampf. And we see that even before the Great Depression, he was thinking of the Jews to blame for the loss of the war, World War I. Well, truth of the matter is Jews were serving in the German army. All of that. Best I can do.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Taylor.
Yes. So who are the Axis powers and who are the Allied powers again?
Yeah, okay. I'll give you the Axis because it's essentially just three countries. And it's essentially Germany, Japan, and Italy. Now, what's going to happen is Italy is going to be defeated fairly quickly, and they're not going to be a power anymore. But we can also put in, and this is where it gets a little bit difficult. France has been taken over by Germany, and they have created a puppet government called Vichy France, named after the little town of Vichy in the middle of France. So I don't like to call France an Axis power because they've been conquered. So I think we can hold it down to just Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, there's also the issue of Spain, which has had its own civil war going on, and its own civil war, but they have a Nazi sympathizer as their chair, but Spain doesn't participate in World War II because practically everybody's done fighting with their own civil war. So I don't put them in. So I would say those three. In terms of the allies, the United States of America coming in very late, but in the beginning it's Britain and it's Commonwealth. And its Commonwealth at that time is Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Countries like Belgium and all the other countries within Europe are conquered. So I don't think we can put them in those categories, okay? And then the Soviet Union, Russia, is an ally of the United States and Britain. So we'll call them an ally after they had been in that non-aggression pact that they had signed with Hitler in Germany before Operation Barbarossa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes, sir. And I just had one more quick question.
Okay.
When you talked about the USS Hornet and how the aircrafts were crashed, you said 11 men were captured. And how many were killed in captivity, or was that
executed? They were captured and executed. There's the number of those crews were fairly large. So there's 50 or 60, let's say 16 aircraft and crews of 3 or 4. There's probably about 75 or 80 that are totally involved. The number I gave you of how many of them were captured and executed is because the Japanese took them captured and then gave them, essentially considered them to be war criminals and executed them. And so that was 11 of them. But there were still some survivors of the Doolittle raids that died just a few years ago. But yeah, you talk about an incredible suicide mission. Really was. And you talk about somebody volunteering to know they're going to die. Quite an operation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Dylan.
You were talking about that there was some guys, or I don't know if it was just one person that he took over. You said he took over something. I don't recall what exactly you said, but it was a little bit before the discussion ended. I'm not sure if you recall.
Took over. I don't know. Somebody help me out here. I don't use.
Would that be Patton and Montgomery?
Well, what I was talking about at the end there was that in Sicily was that Patton had done such a good job in Africa that he was given this command down in Sicily, and then he slapped that kid. And I think what I I don't remember exactly, but what I think I was trying to infer was that Patton's name is going to come up again on Thursday when we talk about D-Day and the fact that he isn't involved because he's gotten in trouble with his boss. And that's a big story, and you'll see how it fits in when I talk about it on Thursday. So I don't really know what else you may be referring to.
Yeah, I think that might have been it.
When I get into World War II, some of this stuff I don't use notes. I just talk. Sorry.
Oh, good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anything else?
Yes, sir. Again.
Taylor, you again? You got something else?
Yes. Just to make sure. So, how does Patton save Ike's skin said.
At Kasserine Pass, we get in trouble when we lose a big battle against the Germans. How he saves his ass is winning all the rest of the battles. And I can't go into great detail about that because if I went into every battle of everything, this would be a 16-week course, which I do teach. So I can't really get involved in too much of that, but just say this, that Patton was a very good, successful commander in the North African campaign that is called Operation Torch. He is so good that he essentially saves Eisenhower as a commander. And when it comes time to choose a supreme Allied commander over this entire European operation, FDR is going to choose Ike. And so I make the case that if it hadn't been for for Patton doing such a good job in the Operation Torch, we may never have heard of an Eisenhower. Hell, we may not have been effective at D-Day, and maybe he would have never been president. You can make all kinds of what-if arguments about how good Ike was when he finally got in the big job, but it was Patton's effectiveness as a leader in Africa that made the difference on Eisenhower's campaign, Eisenhower's career. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Aaron.
So for assignment 3 over the essays on the books, will we get to choose which book we're going to write it over, or will that be determined for us?
The essay that you're writing on one of the 3 books has already been determined.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and it was determined a couple of weeks ago. So let me see if I can remember. I believe who is your TA?
Morgan, she said it was over the flapper, but I didn't know if there's
You
any.
don't know whether Morgan knows what she's talking about? Yes, she does. Morgan will be doing flapper and you do flapper. And
Okay.
those of you that are doing Nathan are doing Johnny Got His Gun. And those of you that are TAs or work with Sarah will be doing Last Night I Dreamed of Peace. All 3 books are due at the same time. The essay, whatever I said in the syllabus is when it's due. And I will tell you this, that this is kind of new. What I used to do is have it be done, and Johnny Got His Gun was due like in March, and then the other one was due in April, and the other one was due in May, and I didn't think that was fair. So I have them all due at the same time now. Anything else?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Kayla.
Hi, so there's a nickname for General Erwin Rommel that you said is something about a fox.
The Desert Fox was his nickname.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I had a quick question too. So like for our next midterm, I was wondering, I remember you saying we're gonna have 2 essay questions, but are those gonna be like questions from the lectures or from the book? Because I was confused if you're gonna have those 2 questions.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I can answer that. Your next exam next Thursday, week from Thursday, this time you had 5 IDs that were each worth 2 points. This time you will have 3 IDs. You will choose 3 IDs that are each worth 2 points, and you will have 2 essay questions, one on Johnny Got His Gun and one on Flapper. And I will choose that question for each of those books from the list of questions that you were given a couple of weeks ago. You were given 10 questions for each book, as I recall, and I will give you a question to write on instead of an ID. So if you have read the books and if you have gone to your discussion section, then you should be able to answer that question. Now, one question that I get sometimes from students when I do it face-to-face, you go out into a room and 10 of you get together and talk about an answer. Well, we didn't do that this time. You did it with your own TAs as a discussion section. That answer that you're going to write is your answer. It doesn't have to be the answer that somebody else said, because you might disagree with that answer. And generally speaking, these are not, well, you know the questions. You know them ahead of time. They're discussion questions. And what you're going to have to do is convince Morgan or convince Nathan or convince Sarah that, first of all, you read the book. Okay, that's what those questions are sort of designed. You can't answer it, haven't read it. And so when they're grading, that's one of the first things they're going to think of is, did this person even read this book? Because I've done this before. And I've had some students write some answers that you can't believe. There's no way you could have read Johnny Got His Gun and think that Johnny went to a store and bought one. There's no way you could know that. And I had a student say that one time. So my point is that you have to have read these books because they're part of your assignments. And if you sat in on the discussions, and if you read and if you looked at those questions, it's going to be one of those questions. But I get to pick it.
And one last thing is that I don't know if other students have the same problem, but while I was taking the test, I almost ran out of time towards the end because I know it was like a 5-paragraph essay. And with like 2 essays, do you expect them to be still like a 5-paragraph structure, or is it supposed to be shorter? I'm just not sure.
Yeah, my advice on that is this. If you run out of time, when you get to that point where you run out of time, stop writing and say that. And let your TA know that, okay? It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to, I mean, it is sort of still what it is because you're in this class and you still have, 270 of you are doing the same thing. But that's a better answer than anything else that you can do to try to shortcut the situation. Here's what I recommend, as this is just my own advice, and everybody learns different and everybody writes different. But my advice is that you do the multiple choice first and you do it as quickly as possible, and that you try to eliminate all but like 2 of the questions. Usually in a question and answer multiple choice situation, there's going to almost always be 2 answers that are just plain stupid. There's no way that could be the right answer. Get rid of those and then try to decide between 2 that are fairly close. And you should have had the answer given to you by one of my lectures, because when I choose questions that are supposed to be based on my lectures. I write the exam, so that's what I do, okay? So do those fast and leave the ones you have no idea what the answer is, leave those vacant and come back to them. Then do your IDs, get through that as quick as you can, and then write your essay. And I understand that everybody writes differently and time-wise, but this is the best we could do. It's the same thing if you were doing it in person. In fact, it would be harder if you were doing it in person because you would have to write it in a blue book, okay? And you'd have to write it in a blue book in such a way that so Morgan or Nathan or Sarah could read it. And sometimes that's even harder. So at least now you get to use your computer. Best I can do, sorry. Anything else? Well, thank you for your attention. I have another lecture, another 5 o'clock Zoom to get to with someone from Hawaii. That's only 11 o'clock in the morning there. And so we will meet again on Thursday, and I will try. I'm not going to rush through this because we're going to talk about some really important stuff on Thursday, like D-Day. We're going to talk about the Manhattan Project, which should be very interesting to you folks because it's right, just not too far. Heck, it's only an hour and a half from where I am right now, but it's only 6 hours from Lubbock to Los Alamos. Okay, and that's where it happened. We're going to invent and build a couple of atomic bombs, and we're going to use them. And we're going to talk about whether we should have used them or not. We're going to do that kind of stuff, okay? I will see you all next Thursday. Have a good couple of days, okay?
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.